Alright, so I'm back. We're going to go ahead and move a little bit quicker here and start to apply more of these shaders to the different objects in our scene. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take care of the floor. Okay, so I'm going to take the floor here. I'm going to select it in my viewport, simply right click. I'm going to go to assign new material, and this time I'm going to assign an MI material, and this time we'll just go straight with the X version since that's the superior version. The newer version is usually better. Okay, and there it is on the floor. Again, by default, it's going to be reflective and stuff, kind of like glass, which is obviously no good. So I'll just right click on this guy and go down to material attributes. And here's the material for the floor. Let's go ahead and change the name of the shader. So we'll change this to floor mat. I'll copy the name, just come over here and paste it right in front of SG. Okay. Right. Now for the diffuse, we obviously don't want the color to be gray. So what we're going to do is actually apply texture to this. I want this floor to look like a nice sort of glossy type varnished wood floor with wood panels. So what we're going to do is go to the color here, go to the checkerboard icon. We're going to plug in a file. And the file we're going to go ahead and plug in right here. Things are going to go a little bit slow because of that IPR. So what I'm probably going to do is pause that IPR. Let me close that. Yeah, the IPR is slowing me down. So I'm going to hit this pause button that's right up here. Now temporarily stop the IPR. I'll go back to my folder icon. There we go. That's much better. And what we're going to do is go to, let's just scroll here to the end. There should be a couple here called Wooden Planks Bump and Wooden Planks Color. We want to plug in the Wooden Planks Color. Now for the filter, I'm going to get rid of this quadratic filter because I don't like it, and I'm going to switch over to a bitmap, which is going to look a lot better, and that's going to do it for this. Now I'm going to go to the place 2D texture over here, and I want to repeat my UVs. Okay, I'm going to repeat it to about 3 and 3, which is going to look pretty good. Okay, close that. And let's go ahead and unpause the IPR simply by hitting the pause button again. See what we have. You can see it's still not coming out too good. So let's go ahead and pause that IPR. Let's go back to the, actually I'll just go to the hypershade. I'll do it from here. Let me go to the top menu here, and let me go to floor, and I'll graph that network. Here it is in my work area. So let me go down to my work area here, and let me hide this create toolbar since I don't need it at the moment. Okay, so this is going to be pretty good to work with the hypershade this way instead. Let's open up the floor material, and what I'm going to do is make some changes here. The weight, I'm going to take the weight and I'm going to put that to about 0.5 so the floor is not too bright, and I'm going to give the roughness about 50%, so 0.5 as well, just to give it a nice mix. Now I do want the floor to have reflection simply because it's supposed to be a nice shiny varnished wooden floor. And let me go ahead and take down this hypershade for the moment. Now if I go ahead and unpause the IPR here, you can see that the floor isn't properly updating, which is a problem, and that could be because I have to do a brand new IPR. So let me do a brand new IPR just to refresh this. I'm just going to do an area down here of the floor, and there we go. Now the floor is rendering out correctly. It's just a little bug with the IPR. Sometimes you have to cancel out the IPR and create a brand new one for it to work properly. And you're going to notice something awesome here. Now with this wooden floor texture here, you can see that there's some color bleeding going on with that wall. You see how the wall is getting this sort of brownish color here? That color is coming, it's reflecting off of the wall. So the ambient occlusion shader is doing an awesome job of creating that fake indirect illumination, which doesn't look very fake, it looks actually very realistic. Okay, now you can see that the floor is very shiny right now. It's very reflective, and we have to actually go ahead and change some of those parameters. So one thing that I'm going to do is, I don't like the way that this reflection of the floor looks. You can see that the window just above it is being reflected down here almost like a piece of glass, and that obviously is no good. So the way to control that is under reflection, you have this glossiness parameter, which is now set to 1 by default. And 1 means that the glossiness is going to look like a pure reflection of a mirror. So it's going to look nice and clean. That's not what I want. I'm going to reduce that glossiness to about 0.5. And now you notice that the reflection gets blurred out. So the lower the glossiness parameter, the more blurred out the reflection gets, to the point where it gets so blurred out that you can't even see it. You can't even make out what that reflection is. But in my case, I'm going to keep it at 0.5, so it's kind of a mix in between. So you can still kind of see the window, but it looks nice and glossy and blurry and more realistic. Okay, it's very difficult to make it out right there. All right. Now we have this highlights only parameter right here. Okay. And if we go ahead and turn on highlights only, you notice that now the reflection, the characteristics of the reflection totally changed. Here it is before, with the highlights only parameter turned off. Everything is pretty much being reflected off this floor. If I turn on highlights only highlights get reflected off this floor. Things that are very bright. For example, this area light that's outside the window coming in is just going to show up here as this highlight. And then pretty much anything else that's not a highlight, so reflections of this wall, stuff like that, is not going to show up. I actually prefer the way that this looks instead, because I don't want that floor looking too shiny, looking almost like marble or ceramic tile, something like that. So I'm going to go with this sort of characteristic here. Looks a little bit better. Now the metal material parameter here, if we turn that on, it totally changes the way that this thing reflects. This tries to mimic better the way that metal materials reflect light and highlights things like that with this architectural shader. And we'll talk more about that later. Okay. If we go to advanced reflection here, we actually have some more advanced parameters, as the name suggests, to control the way that this object is reflecting. And probably the most important parameter here is the use max distance. You see, in real life, if you take some time to analyze an actual room or house, or even better, a kitchen, somewhere where there's some shiny and reflective type materials, have a look at some ceramic tile. Place an object on top of the ceramic tiles. Just lay it on top. Say, for example, a picture. Place a picture on top of a countertop made of ceramic tiles. Make sure that the ceramic tiles are shiny. You notice that the ceramic tiles reflect the picture that's just above it. If you were to take that picture in your hand and start to slowly raise it up into the air so it gets farther and farther from the surface of the tiles, what you would notice is that the reflection begins to fade away on the tiles themselves until you get to the point where the tiles no longer reflect the picture because it's too far away from the surface. This is actually a characteristic of the way that reflections work in real life, with probably the exception being a very clean, shiny, polished mirror where you can still see the reflection far, far, far away. But with something like ceramic tiles or shiny varnished wood, this is going to be the characteristic that happens in the real world. Okay, to mimic that characteristic, we have this advanced reflection parameter here of use max distance. So we'll turn that on. Okay, by default, the max distance is set to 0. That works just like with ambient occlusion. A distance of 0 basically means that the reflection goes on forever and ever and ever, like a mirror. But this isn't a mirror. It's a wooden floor with some shiny varnish on top of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the max distance and put that to about, say, 150. And you immediately won't notice much of a change here. Let me go ahead and take the highlights parameter off. Okay? Now let me take that max distance and uncheck that. You can see how strong the reflections are here. Even back here with this counter, you can see how strong those reflections are. Looks more like a mirror. Now when I turn on that max distance, you notice that the material appears to get darker. Well, it's not that the material is getting darker. It's that the material is reflecting less objects that are far away from it. So objects that are farther away, like the ceiling or the top of the window, are going to be less visible as a reflection on the object, which makes it look more realistic and makes it look a lot nicer. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn highlights on only back on again, because I actually like that much better. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Now I'm done with the reflection parameters here for the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and collapse that. And under refraction here, we have some different refraction parameters. Now, refraction parameters are best used whenever you're working with something that's transparent, say glass or a window, something like that. Since this wooden floor is not transparent, obviously, we're not going to go ahead and change any refraction parameters. We're not going to mess around with anisotropy, and we are going to come in here under BRDF and discuss some of these parameters. Now, the BRDF is an advanced set of parameters here that controls the way that your reflections look versus the angle that your camera is rendering out from. Okay, so again, here's another real life example. Go to, say, a shiny desk. Well, usually desks aren't shiny, but let's go back to those ceramic tiles in the kitchen that I was talking about earlier with the picture. Okay, and if you look at those ceramic tiles dead on, like right from the top with your eyes, you'll notice that, yeah, they're a little bit reflective, but not too reflective. Okay, now slowly move your head and go down almost like the sun over the earth, and just kind of go to more of an incident sort of angle. So now you're looking at the tiles more from a horizontal point of view. So you see the edge of the tiles. As you continue to move your eyes downward, so the tiles are facing less and less toward you, and they're facing more away from you, you'll start to notice that the edge of the tiles become more and more reflective. These are called Fresnel reflections. And this is a phenomenon that happens in real life. In real life, objects get more reflective if you look at them from an incident angle. Okay? That's the same thing that you can do here with this shader in Mental Ray. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Fresnel reflections. So if we turn that on, you notice now that the object becomes less reflective. This is because the object is going to be more reflective if we look at it from an angle. And I'll show you how that works. Let me just move that out of the way. And in my viewport, I'm going to go ahead and take my camera here. I'm going to look at this from almost a dead-on angle like this. It's a little bit hard to see there, so let me... Okay, there we go. You can see the reflection there of the highlight. It's not very strong. It's pretty weak. Okay? Now watch what happens when I move my camera down to look at this floor from an angle like this. Do you see the difference? The more of an angle I look at this floor from, the more reflective it's going to appear. And that is actually a characteristic that mimics real life. This is how objects that are reflective and shiny in real life actually behave. And it's probably something that you've never noticed before, but if you take the time to do some experimentation with some things around your office or your home or whatnot, you can actually see and test this out, and you'll be pretty surprised when you notice, hey, you know what, he's right. Objects really do reflect light in this manner in the real world. And it's a very subtle effect, but it makes a world of difference when you're doing photorealistic renders and working with materials and shaders like this, especially in an architectural scene where realism is very, very important. Okay, so let me close that. Let me go back to my previous view. Okay, which I believe was probably this one here. Not even really sure. Let's go back to the Hypershade and open up the collapse, bring that down, bring back the attribute editor. Okay, now I'm going to take Fresnel reflection off, and the reason that I'm going to do it is because if I go back to my IPR here, check out my floor. I like that highlight reflection there to be pretty strong. I don't want it to be too weak, and if I use Fresnel reflection, it's going to weaken it up a bit at the angle that I want. Now you could use these different parameters here to control the angle. For example, the 0 degree reflection parameter controls the reflectivity at facing angles. So right now it's set to about 20% at facing angles. If I increase that, you see that the reflection gets stronger. I'm going to go back to 0.2, which is the default. Now the 90 degree reflection is going to control the reflection when you look at it from angles, from incident angles. So if I lower that, the reflection becomes weaker because right now I'm looking at this floor from an angle. I'm not looking at the floor head on, I'm looking at the floor from an angle. So as I lower this, the reflection becomes weaker and weaker at the angle. I'm going to leave it at the default. I like the default. And the BRDF curve parameter here is simply going to change the overall reflection here. So as I change this, the curve actually changes the characteristics here of the reflection. So I can make the reflection stronger by reducing the amount, or I can make them weaker by increasing the amount, which sounds kind of backwards, but that's just the way it works. So I'll leave it at the default. Okay, that's going to do for BRDF for now. Now I do want to use these built-in ambient occlusion parameters here, so I'm going to turn that on. Okay, and the distance I'm going to leave at 10 is perfectly fine. And you know what I'm going to do? Let me close that. Let me move this out of the way. Let me go to, I'm going to go to my view options up here in the viewport. I'm going to go to bookmarks, and I don't have a bookmark here. Okay, so let me just kind of zoom out here. I'm going to do a render from about this angle here. And let me do an IPR from there. See how that looks? Just trying to find a pretty good angle that I can render this out from and get a good look at most, if not the entire scene here. And this angle actually looks like it's going to work out pretty well. Okay, not bad. Kind of like this angle. So what I'm going to do is, let me hide that render view. I'm going to go to View, go down to Bookmarks. I'm going to go to Edit Bookmarks, and I'm going to create a new bookmark, and I'm going to name it Render 1. Okay. I'm going to hit Enter to apply it, and then close that. So now every time I go to Bookmarks over here, I can see I have my Render 1 bookmark, so I can always go to this render view that's right here, this position. So let's go back to the render view here. Okay, and it's constantly updating. Let me bring back my attribute editor for the material. Okay, and I don't want to render out the entire image here. Just it's a waste of render time. So I'm just going to draw a region right in this area here, which will give me more than enough of a preview to be able to tell what's going on. Okay, so the ambient shadow color, I'm going to take the ambient shadow color and knock that to black. I'm going to take the ambient light color and start to increase that. As I increase that, the floor becomes brighter and brighter, starts to look much nicer. So you can see it looks pretty good. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to give this a value of 0.5. It's going to be 50% gray. And I'm not going to use detail distance. Instead, I'm going to use color bleed. Okay, so I can see that the floor texture and stuff is coming out pretty nice. Looks really cool. Now I want to apply bump map to this wooden floor. So I'll go down here to the bump parameters. You notice that we have two slots here, an overall bump and a standard bump. I want to use a standard bump, so I'll click on the checkerboard icon and plug in a file. And here's my bump parameter. Since I'm already here, I'm going to reduce the bump depth to about 0.025. So it's nice and subtle. And I'll go to the file here and I'm going to pull up the wooden planks bump. Okay. And the filter here, I don't think I want to filter, so I'm probably just going to turn that off. Alright. Good to go. Okay, let me go back to the hypershade and go back to the material. Alright, so there it is with color bleeding. It's looking pretty good. Color bleeding is going off onto the walls right there, which looks pretty nice. Okay, so that's going to do it for the floor. I'm going to say that the floor is done. Pretty happy with it so far. It's looking pretty good. As you can see, looks brighter, looks nicer, and looks pretty realistic. Of course, the rest of the objects in the scene need to get the materials applied, and we have to do a lot of stuff to the scene before we can say that it's finished. So this video has been running for a pretty good while, so I'm going to end it here, and in the next one we'll continue to chip away at this and keep working here with these mental ray shaders and hypershade.